I may have been gone for a month, but it wasn't for no reason. I've been scheming, and it's time to become the villain. So it is GP Zakros this month, July of 2025, and I have chosen a deck I almost brought to the Grand Prix back in May, but ultimately decided not to because I felt it was not quite where I needed it to be. And after a bit of further iteration, I think I've landed on a build of this deck that is properly scary, and it is aided in large part by a change that came this month. So, in the third month balance patch for Cyberos, the 15th month balance patch, really, since it is Cyberos' 15th month in the format, Corpse Pyre Fiend had its stats effectively halved from 5-4 to 3-2, halved rounded up, and had its cost slashed in half as well, from 2 and a pair of colorless black hybrids to just a pair of colorless black hybrids. Its text box otherwise remained the same, beyond a slight note that folks realized after the patch dropped that Corpse Pyre Fiend did not give itself Menace when integrating a creature with Menace, so they changed it to now do that as well. I instantly saw this and thought, wow, wouldn't it be nice to just give everything in both players' graveyards the ability for me to flash it back for 1 black or colorless mana, plus their mana cost? And the answer is, yes, that would be really nice. So the core here is that we are a white-black control deck, skewing very heavily towards black in the early game, and then starting to get a couple white spells towards the mid to late game. And we take advantage of all of that by just burying our opponents in card advantage, hand attack, and removal. So, card advantage comes primarily thanks to Data Weaver. We're going to be 1-for-1ing our opponent with a lot of effects, and then disrupting our opponent with our removal beyond that, but Data Weaver is how we go beyond the 1-for-1s most effectively. So this is going to integrate the top 2 cards of our opponent's library. If we play this on turn 4 and we integrate a land, we can just play that land immediately, so this effectively hits our land drops more consistently. Quote-unquote hits our land drops more consistently, and then any spells we integrate from then on, we can play on future turns. When that is coupled with Corpse Pyre Fiend, of course, integrating any card in any graveyard, what that allows us to do is use Corpse Pyre Fiend plus Data Weaver to, once a turn, replay a card from our graveyard or our opponent's graveyard, just uncapped, unfettered. So any of our removal that ends up in our graveyard, we can replay. Any of our creatures that end up in the graveyard, we can replay. If we are just desperate for a land drop, we can replay our own Primal Fisher for a colorless or a black, if we have no other use for our Data Weaver that turn. So, that's a really solid, efficient value engine that comes down pretty early, can be like reasonably threatening. 3-2s and 2-3s can go the distance when we are controlling our opponent as hard as this deck is built to control the game. We are backing up that value core with hand attack in the form of Exorcist of Errors, 2 mana 2/3 that enters, has target player reveal their hand. Half of their hand, roughly, in a face-up pile, and the other cards in a face-down pile. We have to choose a pile and choose a non-land card from that pile to exile while Exorcist is in play. So this can just throw our opponent off tempo. If they pile in a way that we can effectively snipe the thing they are most invested in playing, early this just really throws our opponent off kilter, and then late game we can almost always just hit a relevant card in their hand. Unless they're bagging exclusively lands, at which point, Exorcist is just going to be a 2/3, which is fine, because it's a well-costed 2/3. Beyond that, we also have 3 copies of Phalanx's Touch to attack our opponent's hand. Just, make them discard a card, lose 1 life. We can crack it to draw a card and lose 1 life as well. So our opponent can go down a card, we go up a card, all for 3 mana total, but we can split that across multiple turns. And then Path of Phalanx is our big hand attack spell off the rip. 3 mana, make the opponent discard 2 and mill 2. Then we can have each opponent lose 2 life and we gain 2 life. And then if they have 8 cards in their graveyard on the final chapter ability, we can eat a card from their graveyard and play it, cast it that turn. We can't play lands off of the Path of Phoenix, unlike Data Weaver, but we can still play our opponent's removal with Path of Phoenix. We can play their threats and just kind of take over the game in that way as well. So that's our primary hand attack. We do have one more consideration, but we'll get there. You might be surprised to see me playing it because if you know my feelings on this format, you know it's a card I hate dearly, but we will get there. As far as removal, we are playing a pair of Inklight Dancers in the main. This card I've wanted to experiment with a little bit more. 2 mana, 1/3, can pay a black and sacrifice a creature to just ping each opponent for 1 and we gain 1, but can also adventure it for Stroke of Light as a 2 mana -2/2 adventure that effectively draws us the 2 mana 1/3. So I really like Inklight Dancer. Every time I read it, I'm more and more impressed by how clean it feels. And I just wanted to kind of put it through its paces in this GP, and given what I know about the GP field, I'm relatively confident that this was a correct inclusion in the deck. And in fact, I have some regrets about my sideboarding, and I could see maybe the correct sideboard plan in the future being more copies of this in the sideboard for faster matchups. Not quite removal, but does kind of do something similar as a more like preemptive measure. We also have 2 copies of Looming Psyhawk, 3 mana 2/1 flash flyer with lifelink, and makes the opponent unable to create tokens. So if my opponent is on a very token-centric strategy, Looming Psyhawk effectively acts as preemptive removal of just kind of picking off any tokens that our opponents would create before they can create them. Beyond this, we do have some actual hard removal. We have 3 copies of Pull of Tizerus. This is just going to be a cheap removal to pick off smaller creatures, and because this almost always is going to be shipping itself to its graveyard immediately, we can pretty reliably flash it back with the Corpse Pyre Fiend Data Weaver engine for 1 mana every turn. For 2 mana because we have to activate the Fiend, but that's a really cost-effective way of just picking off 1 creature every turn and taking over the board. We also have 2 copies of Omen of Slaughter. I've been less impressed by edicts as of late, and so I didn't want to go too deep on the edicts. Looming Psyhawk helps it feel a little more relevant because tokens are really good against the edicts. And this is Planeswalker interaction as well. If the opponent only has a Planeswalker, we can respond to an ability that would make a token by omening the Planeswalker out of play, for instance. So Omen does give us some flexibility against Planeswalkers as well, some ways to pick off the Planeswalker from play in that regard. And then we have 2 copies of Sealing Strike as well. My big mistake in deck building, and I will just acknowledge this straight up, I do not have much in the way of artifact and enchantment interaction. I'm really leaning on these 2 copies of Sealing Strike to carry a lot of weight. I think if I could go back to the drawing board, I would be more intentional with the inclusion of a lot of artifact and enchantment removal in the main and sideboard across the 75 in total, because as it stands, we're kind of going to be very reliant on our opponent's artifact and enchantment removal with Data Weaver and with Path of Phoenix. But Sealing Strike is just a nice catch-all answer. If we really, really don't need it early, we can cycle it. And because we can cycle it, we could just rebuy it with Corpse Pyre Fiend and then play it with Data Weaver later on. Also notable is that, Phoenix's Touch, Omen of Slaughter, they also self-sacrifice, which means Corpse Pyre Fiend can eat it and replay with Data Weaver. The reason our curve is so low is, I mentioned, we're a Revolt of the Palace deck. I don't actually remember if I've mentioned this, but we are a Revolt of the Palace deck. 5 mana Saga time loop, so every time we finish it, it starts back at 0. First and second chapters are going to flip the top 6 cards of our library. We get a non-land permanent with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield. And then the third chapter is going to just give our creatures double strike. Revolt of the Palace is a debilitating value engine. It is the other way besides Data Weaver that we really bury our opponents in card advantage, because we just have so many annoying permanents that just hit the board. The tax is that Revolt of the Palace really wants us to be lower on lands and low on non-permanent spells. Because the more non-permanents, the more instants and sorceries we have, the more lands we have, the more likely it is that we whiff or hit something we don't care about on the first and second chapters. And so with that in mind, Revolt of the Palace has some pretty strict deck building restrictions, but I would go so far as to say that while I think Shigane Manor Burns is the best generic saga because there's a very low opportunity cost to play it. It just kind of does the things you need it to do. If you are a slower strategy, you can get more value out of it over time. But Revolt of the Palace, I think, the time loop saga with the highest ceiling by far. Because when built around it properly, and I hope I'm building around it properly here, it can just turn after turn after turn tear apart the opponent's strategy for 5 initial mana investment and then never having to invest mana again. And the double strike helps us close the game, which is nice because we do still have to kill our opponent at some point. Although I will admit, the primary win condition of this deck is demoralizing the opponent until they recognize that there is no hope. But, you know, if they make us play it out, we do still need ways to kill them, and Revolt of the Palace's double strike does help, but so does the fact that we have 16 creatures. And we have 16 creatures, though I've only talked about 15, because we have 1 copy of Athreos Gold-Eyed. This was a potential concern of, like, death triggers and sacrifice decks being really important. They ended up not being very important based on the GP field. There's not a whole lot of like sacrifice matters stuff kicking around right now. But I do still think Athreos Gold-Eyed can be nice as just a way to pad our life total a little bit. It's a hit off of Revolt of the Palace that can do so. And if we can get to 7 Devotion, Athreos just becomes a haymaker threat that can get us more value along the way. I like the incidental life gain and pinging of Athreos's coin counter ability that exiles creatures if they would die. And that works really nicely in conjunction with Inklate Dancer to kind of give us some surprise reach over the finish line as well, as another avenue to try and push through lethal, besides just a double strike from Revolt of the Palace. And as mentioned, you know, Revolt of the Palace really wants us to be lighter on lands, so we have less non-land permanents. So we have more non-land permanents showing up in those chapter ability searches. So with that in mind, we have 4 copies of Leyshard. This is going to allow us to kind of accelerate out our Revolt of the Palace a turn early. We can play this on turn 2, and then turn 4 we can play a Revolt of the Palace rather than playing it on turn 5. Or this just gives us some more flexibility with our mana. Allows us to double spell a little earlier because we can play Leyshard on 2 and then go like Exorcist plus Corpse Pyre Fiend or Data Weaver plus a 1-drop off of Data Weaver. Pull of Tizers plus Data Weaver. So like Leyshard just gives us a lot of flexibility in that regard to try and get more spells out of our hand and impacting the opponent more rapidly, while also digging us a little bit deeper towards lands that we might want to draw or towards other spells we might want to play. As for things we can't hit off of Revolt of the Palace, though it can't hit itself, our other whiffs on Revolt of the Palace include 22 lands. We have 2 of each coalesced land, which are here primarily as, you know, pain lands that can also, you know, the coalesced mesas can also still pay for the integrating and casting of Corpse Pyre Fiends, and they are here to allow our coalesced cores and Time-Worn Crags also tap for white mana if we need to. That's not going to come up too often. It's really more so a white land that casts Corpse Pyre Fiend. And then beyond that, like, Data Weaver has 2 generic pips, Exorcist has 1, Inklate's got 1, Psyhawk's got 2, but it's also a white spell. A lot of our cards are going to be at least 1 generic pip that we can just pay the colorless from Coalesced Mesa into so we don't hurt ourselves. I got some questions during the decklist stream about Coalesced Core, and this is here because of just how many black pips we have in our spells. Being able to let Coalesced Mesa tap for black, or let our other colorless land tap for black could be nice as well. And so this was just a consideration of recognizing that casting our spells is important, and if we have a lot of black pips in our spells, like if we have Path of Phoenix plus Corpse Pyre Fiend, or I guess like Path of Phoenix plus Inklate Dancer activations we want to hold up, having that flexibility to use our colorless mana as black mana is nice. Although maybe I would want to go down to 1 core and 4 swamps. That's another thing of like if I could go back and adjust the deck list after submission. Our other colorless land is 2 copies of Time-Worn Crags, because I am not in the business of getting killed by creature lands. We do not have much in the way of good interaction for creature lands in the Revolt of the Palace eligible hits. So Time-Worn Crags is how we solve that problem. And it is through extreme measured violence. I am going to explode 100-handed pillars, and you cannot stop me. And in fact, this is also an avenue to victory if our opponent's on a very greedy mana base, because we can use Time-Worn Crags plus Corpse Pyre Fiend and Data Weaver to effectively give us Wasteland Crucible of Worlds. It's going to be a lot more costly, but it is an avenue of attack for us. Speaking of creature lands, we do have 2 copies of Gates to the Underworld, because why worry about losing to creature lands when we could have our opponent lose to creature lands? We have 1 copy of Desolate Path. I didn't want to go too high on this because our deck is relatively efficient at spending mana every turn, and so cycling this is a real cost. But I wanted to have the flexibility to have at least 1 of it, and it is nice that we can cycle it and then replay it with Corpse Pyre Fiend Data Weaver if needed. Beyond that, 4 Primal Fissures to go find our basics, 4 Stark Expanses as just good shock lands, and then 3 Swamps, 2 Plains. Again, I think if I could go back, I would play 4 Swamps and 1 Coalesced Core, but we make the choices we make, and then we have to live with those choices. And then our final card we can't hit off of Revolt of the Palace is my least favorite card in the format. I mentioned we are the villain this month, so it's about time I make my statement that I think this card's profoundly not okay. Chronicle of Extinction is a relatively innocuous modal spell on its front face, though I think it's a fairly powerful modal spell on its front face. 2 and double black sorcery. Choose 1 if the spell's flashback cost was paid. Instead, choose 3, and you may choose the same mode more than once. And that line is what really ticks it from powerful to ridiculous. So on the powerful side of things, it is a modal spell that can edict a creature and planeswalker from an opponent, make them discard 2 cards and then exile their graveyard, or give all creatures -2/-2. As far as those modes go, we have 5 creatures in the main that die to the -2/-2 mode between our 3 Corpse Pyre Fiends and our 2 Looming Psyhawks. Otherwise, though, Data Weavers survive, Exorcists survive, Inklight Dancers survive, and Athreos survives it. So against smaller decks, the -2/-2 mode can be really effective. Otherwise, we're most often going to be looking at, the Edict mode to pick off a single important creature or planeswalker or both, and the Hand Attack mode, which is a great way to finalize the value from our Path of Phalanxes, our Phalanxes Touches, and our Exorcist of Errors to truly run our opponent out of resources. Between Chronicle and Path of Phalanx, having 5 Mind Rots that can eventually mess with the opponent's graveyard as well really helps guarantee a solid degree of value in just kind of denying our opponent graveyards as a resource, or getting value out of our opponent's graveyard with Path of Phalanx. Corpse Pyre Fiend's good at pressuring graveyards as well, so we're kind of naturally built well into the flashback decks and surface decks and whatnot. And Chronicle of Extinction's Hand Attack mode is very good at just kind of shutting the door on the opponent and putting them in top deck mode out of nowhere. And then the flashback cost, 7 double black, is not unreasonable here. We have 4 Ley Shards that can help accelerate us to that. Data Weaver helps us make our land drops. We're a 22 lands deck, so it's going to be a bit of a task, but it is entirely feasible that we go all the way up to 9 land drops, or 8 land drops plus a Ley Shard, between integrating our opponent's lands and just drawing more of our own. That flashing this back is an option to just shutter the game completely. But my contention on Chronicle of Extinction being unreasonable is that I think the Hand Attack mode is too strong on its own. Part of why I think it is so good is because it exiles the graveyard. So the danger of discarding my opponent's cards just does not exist. There is no oops, I needed them to not lose that and not put that in their graveyard facet, because this just denies them the resource entirely. I think this card's insane. I have been venting about how insane I think this card is for pretty much the entirety of this year. And I am going to keep doing so for at least a little while longer, because if it doesn't get changed, we have it until January of 2026. But maybe I can put on a good enough performance with this card to demonstrate why I think it needs to get another tweak, because it has been tweaked a couple times. Used to be -3/-3. Used to flashback for 7 when it was released. And I think it is due for another adjustment, because it is my least favorite card in the format by a mile, and I think I have some solid founded reasons for why I think this card is so messed up. Yeah, so enough venting about Chronicle Extinction. Let's talk sideboard. I think sideboard's another area where I could have done a little bit better. We do have some things I do like. We have 2 more copies of Looming Psyhawk, which I'm happy about. 2 more copies of Athreos, which I think I'd probably go down to just 1 in the sideboard. 2 more copies of Chronicle Extinction, which, yeah, it's really good in some matchups, and in those matchups I'd like to have 4, even if it fiddles with Revolt of the Palace math. I think I'm happy with most of those choices. I'd go down like maybe 1 Athreos if I could go back in time. Beyond that, though, beyond the stuff that's already in the main, I have 2 copies each of Archival Storage and Soul Guide Lantern as more graveyard hate. I think I would be inclined to cut the Soul Guide Lanterns if I could go back in time. Not because I think they're bad. I think this card's very good, but more so to make room for that acknowledgement of I don't have much artifact or enchantment hate. I would much rather be on Graceful Finalizer. It's another body that can be relevant on board. It can pick off an enchantment pretty meaningfully, or can get rid of the opponent's graveyard as additional graveyard hate in the same slot as Soul Guide Lantern. I will say right now, I am looking at doing an updated rotation-proof version of this deck in the Final Thoughts, and expect Graceful Finalizer to be in place of Soul Guide Lantern, both because I think I would just be on the Finalizers in that spot if I had thought of it, and also because Soul Guide Lantern will be just rotating in September anyways, because this is ultimately the final standard tournament for Theros Age of Tracks, with next month being a variant format. Archival Storage I'm feeling a little bit better about, just because there is so much in the way of flashback strategies, and all this really hits out of us is the flashback cost of Chronicle of Extinction, but oh no, we'll just loop the single mode for 5 with Corpse Pyre Fiend and Data Weaver. Like, the fact that we can do that is nuts. And Archival Storage does not disrupt that whatsoever. In fact, I could see going up to 3 copies of Archival Storage, just because I think this is so relevant against a lot of the powerful Graveyard Matters things in the field right now. It's not a perfect answer. It doesn't get around reanimation effects, doesn't get around extraction mission, doesn't get around Weft Dancer, but there are a lot of things it does get around, and we have enough natural defenses against the other things that Archival Storage doesn't answer. Otherwise, we have 5 enchantments, all from Theros, so obviously wouldn't be in the rotation-proof build of the deck, but we have one that I kind of included as a joke and have come around to finding it actually being pretty solid in this field, and one that I included quite earnestly and I have some regrets on. So the one that I kind of just threw in as a joke is Zakros Decree. It's Grand Prix Zakros. Why not play Zakros Decree? And the conclusion I've come to is, there's a lot of very aggressive burn-heavy decks right now. Zakros Decree is a meaningful include against those strategies, because it can put our creatures out of range of burn spells in combat. We even have Ominous Slaughters to, kind of get a bit of trickiness with triggering Zakros Decree on the opponent's turn. And then just being able to pad our life total. Having lifelink is really good against burn decks, turns out. And so if we have a Corpse Pyre Fiend that is just hitting for 4 and gaining us 4 life, that is huge against the burn decks. And so, Zakros Decree looks really nice here. I'm less excited about the Fall of Tracks. I initially included it as just sort of an answer for bigger permanents, big planeswalkers and whatnot. And, it makes a couple 1/1 blockers. The problem with the Fall of Tracks is it gives each player control of all permanents they own. And then we draw a card if we didn't gain control of any permanents this way. The problem there is that Data Weaver is going to let us play our opponent's lands and permanents. And if we play a land off of Data Weaver, Fall of Tracks gives it back. If we play a creature off of Data Weaver, Fall of Trax gives it back. If we play a planeswalker or an enchantment or an artifact, yeah, it's bad. I think Follow Tracks, if we have to board it in some matchups, we will. But it is going to be some tough pills to swallow to have to play this alongside Data Weaver, and we will have to navigate the complexities of that anti-synergy very carefully. But hey, I won with red-green counters, and that deck had a lot of anti-synergy, so we can get through this. But yeah, otherwise, sideboard tools, I think I'd like to be on more Inklight Dancers. I'd like to be on more archival storage, Graceful Finalizer, and maybe like Click in the sideboard as well as just sort of an answer to tokens outside of Looming Psyhawk, where Psyhawk answers tokens preemptively, Click deals with tokens after the fact. Though Click is a little slow, so I'm not too sure if that would be the right include. Maybe there's a merit for talking about like more instants and sorceries, that like it's fine to muddle Revolt of the Palace if an instant or sorcery is just that important in a particular matchup. But as it stands, I think there's enough good permanents in the format right now for Revolt of the Palace to just do a lot of work. So we'll hop right into round one here. I guess a little teaser here. I have already played round one. This is my third time recording this deck tech, but I just kind of wanted to give some time to let my thoughts about this deck fully form. And then by the time I wanted to record it today, I was coming up too close to the time we had set for our match. So I decided to record this after the fact, and no spoilers for what's coming. You'll just have to check that match out and see what happens. So I will see you all on the other side of that. The next match for me is going to be round two. But for all of you, I hope you enjoy the round one matchup on the horizon. And I will see you all in the Revolution chat. Take care.